Hello and welcome to the Fairhaven Church Parent Talks podcast, where we desire to equip and empower you as parents to lead well in your home. Today, I'm joined by Todd and Johnny, always two great guys to have on this podcast. So I know they've done a lot of research and study, right, guys?
Oh boy, Johnny has.
Plenty. I'm a little nervous about how long this could go with the amount of studying Johnny did, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Question for you to get started is, what is the bravest or most courageous thing you have ever done, even if it felt small?
Johnny, I feel like you've got some rescue story in there. Here it comes.
I've been stewing on this one for a while, and I was talking to our camera ops / director, Brooks,
Awesomeness
about this.
is what I call him.
Awesomeness.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like a lot of the stories that I have aren't stories of courage, but of stupidity. And like they
That's not gonna work.
They were like moments
that's not the
where
question.
I wasn't being brave, but I was instead doing something to make people laugh when I shouldn't have done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stories like that. But the one moment that kept on popping up into my head was way back when I was in high school. I was asked to play a role on a stage where I was pushed out in a shopping cart and asked to cry like a baby in front of a lot of kids and a lot of my peers. And I don't know if you guys have ever had to act like a baby in front of all your friends, but it's scarring. And that took a lot of bravery, took a lot of courage. And quite frankly, it really made it, easy to do a lot of other things in life.
Oh my goodness.
And that's why I'm like, I feel like it was that moment where I lost a lot of my self-dignity, but it took a lot of courage. And so that was what kept on coming to my mind.
Okay,
So.
I've never heard Todd laugh so much.
I mean, like even to this day, kids, that know of that, they call him Baby Johnny. So if you're out there, you want to see Johnny,
I'm really
just call him Baby
hoping
Johnny.
that Harrison, who's our editor, is going to flash a picture of Baby Johnny
I
right now.
have a picture. I have the picture. I will get it.
That's great. I love that. I wasn't expecting that. That's so good.
Well, that one's funny. I feel like that's not fair. Because it's like, I wish I had, one of those, or like a rescue story where you like pick up a car or something like that.
It says it can be small.
Mine is more serious, I guess. Like, mine is just like surviving high school, I guess. So like I had, there was a kid in high school that always got made fun of, and his name was JC. And like all the time, like getting in fights all the time, and no one would hang around him. And there was one day at lunchtime, I felt like the Holy Spirit prompted me like to go sit with him. He was by himself. And yeah, I mean, even in that, he rejected me though. So. But it was brave for me, all right? It's such a weird story, but that's the one that I
But if you
of.
know you, because you're kind of introverted.
Yeah, 100%.
A little bit.
Yes. Just
a lot of it.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so mine is I'm afraid of heights. And several years ago, we decided when we were on a trip with some friends that we were going to go ziplining. And everybody else was so excited, and so I didn't want to not do it. I didn't want to be that person, but I knew it was going to be really scary. But then I did it, and I was like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought. So it wasn't little to me. It might seem little to other people, but to me, it was a really big deal. So anyway.
That's cool.
Bravery. Love it. Okay, so I think last week we mentioned that we started not only a new series, but that means a new series verse. And so I just wanted to remind you of that. The verse for this series is 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. And what a great verse for us as we're going through the book of Daniel. It's just a great verse to go back to time and time again. And it's one that I think about often. And so I would just encourage you as parents to help your kids and students to memorize this verse. It's really, really critical. We desire so much for our kids and students to be memorizing scripture. It's actually one of those things we say here at Fairhaven is we want to seek God daily. And that's part of seeking him daily is memorizing his word. And so I would encourage you to engage in that way. But this week we're in Daniel 3. This is a very familiar story to many of you, but it's a story that reminds us of the importance of standing for our convictions and being faithful to God. It's a really important story for us. And so Todd, you're going to walk us through what takes place in chapter 3.
Yeah. So Daniel chapter 3 continues the story of God's people being in exile in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar had, come and taken them back to Babylon. And there in chapter 3 is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are part of God's people. They were actually in chapter 1, part of the crew that denied the king's food because they thought it would go against God's law and they would be defiled in that way. So again, standing there for their convictions. But in this story, they get another opportunity to stand for their convictions because King Nebuchadnezzar makes this giant golden statue and calls everyone, when the music plays, everybody has to bow down and worship. And obviously Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't, and they get thrown into the fiery furnace. But I love, before that happens, just their conviction of how God would care for them. But even if not, that they were going to still honor God. They tell Nebuchadnezzar, they say, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." So, in their faith and their desire to honor God, they withstood the test and were thrown in the fiery furnace.
Yeah, I love that. It's a reminder. Something that comes to my mind a lot right now is our worst case scenario. I would say probably for many of us, we think like death is our worst case scenario.
Yeah.
That's God's best for us is when we're followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
It is being with him. So there really is no worst case scenario when you're a follower of Jesus. I think that's a great reminder of that.
Yeah.
They're like, whether he rescues us from this or not, we trust him.
Right, yeah.
Because we're going to be with him. Like we serve God. So Johnny, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but I'm going to do it kind of one at a time.
Yes, that would be good.
Okay, good. So my first question for you is, what was likely the significance of this gold statue?
Yeah. Well, first, before we go into the gold statue, I do kind of want to rewind to Daniel chapter 2 because I think a lot of the significance of the gold statue comes from King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where he had a dream of a statue that had a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. And that dream had a lot of significance, but a lot of it portrayed kingdoms. And in that interpretation of his dream that Daniel gave him, he said that you are that head of gold, that you are God has made you the greatest of all kings. He'll give you a lot of might, a lot of power. And I'm not in that position, but if I was told I'm going to be the greatest of kings and I'm like a head of gold, I know for sure that would go to my head. And I don't think it's a coincidence that right after the dream, we get Daniel 3, where he is building a golden statue for all people to worship. And it's almost like he's saying, worship me. And yes, King Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges Daniel and his God, but he doesn't really, he still wants all fame and glory. He knows that he's the greatest of all kings. And ultimately, he's asking for worship over God. He's saying that I'm the greatest. And some scholars will point out that the gold that the statue was made of could have been plundered from the Israelites. There is still because there's some military expeditions into Syria and Palestine.
We had a little discussion about this beforehand.
So you can't fully, say that it was, but there is a good chance of it because a lot of times in culture they would use stuff from other kingdoms and stuff to build up and to kind of dismantle their God by doing so. But yeah, so the over and over again, you kind of get to see this picture of King Nebuchadnezzar saying, "Hey, I am the greatest. My kingdom is the greatest. Bow down and worship me."
So here's my second question. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Okay, so as Todd is talking about this story of them
Mhm.
being in the fiery furnace, there's a fourth man.
Yes.
So who was that?
Now, again, this is all speculation. We don't actually get to know or see who it was in the actual biblical, you know, narrative. But we can kind of build up some context clues. Some people, a lot of people actually would say that was the pre-incarnate Christ, like it was Jesus with them in the fire. Other people will say that it was an angel of the Lord. And I think ultimately it's not about the fourth person as much as it is God's protection over his people. And I think like it was a supernatural event. And I think of Matthew 28, the Great Commission, where after Jesus commissions his disciples, he leaves them with this promise saying, "And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Like God is with his people. He's promising that he's going to be with his people. And while we don't know, we can kind of build up, a case for either of those. We do know that God was over all of it, that he was the one that was providing the supernatural protection over his people.
Yep. So then if it wasn't Daniel,
Mhm.
because we lump those four together
Yeah.
Yeah.
all the time, where was he?
Now that is the other. So there's from what I've done an extensive studying. There's three cases that I have found over and over again. The first case actually comes from Daniel 2:48. Well, first two cases I'll say comes from Daniel 2:48. So this is where after Daniel interprets King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he actually gives him a place of power. It says this: "Then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all of his wise men." Now, this has led some people to say, Daniel, since he was appointed into this position of power, he was just probably out somewhere doing, a chore or an errand for the king, which meant he was outside of Babylon or he was somewhere else, away from all of this was happening. The second option was that Daniel, when he was promoted to this position, he was placed into the high courts. And so here, Nebuchadnezzar might have exempted him from this command to bow down. But this is where we get into the interesting part. So there's a third option where Daniel gave in. He might have gave into the command. And now this doesn't make as much sense because when we read Daniel, we can see that he was one to not defile himself, like Daniel 1:8. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to him by the king. So many people take that as saying, hey, Daniel, he was probably out in an errand. He was probably somewhere. We don't know where he was, but we probably do know that if he was there, that he would have been with his friends, not bowing down because of his desire to honor God, to do things. Like we already see him going against the flow a lot of times for God. Like this would have not been an exception for him. So we don't know where he was. Again, this is all speculations, but I don't know. We don't see Daniel. Well, we don't see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the same way with Daniel in the lion's den. So there's a lot of stories that we don't see them together, but we do see that they will constantly, go against the flow to make sure that God was glorified, that he was honored, and that he was lifted up. So
yeah, and we see later on in the book of Daniel, it talks more about him being elevated into prominence and how that actually caused so many issues for him. And so that's definitely probably like the strongest thought. But I always, as a kid, I think I always thought they were all together in the fire just because like the songs and all the stories just always lumped them together. So I think it's important to just talk through the fact that I love how you pointed out the fourth man. It doesn't really matter, but what we know is that God was protecting and providing and interceding on their behalf, which is just amazing. So we're going to point a little bit towards Daniel chapter 4, just slightly. And Todd, my question, these three young men, they had a huge impact on the king, ultimately. Their faithfulness did. And so what do we learn just a little bit in Daniel chapter 4 about that?
Yeah, well, I think it is neat to see how their courage and their faith in God was, so evident. And then God rescuing them, that the king actually praised God. Like, so I go back to chapter 3. I wrote down 3 little quotes. So Daniel chapter 3 says, "Praise the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him." And then verse 29, he says, "There is no other God who can rescue like this." Talking about God's power and his character to rescue. And then in chapter 4, he tells everyone, "I want you all to know about the miraculous signs and wonders the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how powerful his wonders. His kingdom will last forever. His rule through all generations." So it was neat to see how their faithfulness helped to point the king to Yahweh, the eternal God, who was, to be praised. And he did end up praising God in that way.
Yeah, I love that. So a couple just takeaways for you as parents to think about for this week. One I wrote down is that bold faith didn't keep these men from the fire, but their faith sustained them in the fire. I think that's a really important thing for us to remember. And also that our faith doesn't keep us from walking through hard times, but it helps us to face the battles that we are going to walk through. And it was a reminder to me of James chapter 1, verses 2-4. And it says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." I mean, the reality is that we experience trials and tribulations being in the fire, right? But if we are doing that, following God, he is transforming us to be like his son. And so I hope that that's a verse that you can consider and cling to. Well, next week, we are going to be talking about Daniel in the lion's den. So a very, very familiar story, but there's a lot in there. And so I hope that you will join us next week so that you know how to talk with your kids and your students. We'll see you then.